2:47 a.m. local time, February 3rd, an Ilyushin IL-76 cargo aircraft, registration number RA78830, touched down at Tehran's Mehrabad International Airport on runway 29 left. Not unusual in itself. Mehrabad handles military cargo flights regularly. What made controllers flag this particular arrival wasn't the aircraft type, wasn't the origin point, Ulyanovsk, Russia, and it wasn't even the flight path, which had taken the plane across the Caspian Sea in a route that carefully avoided Turkish and Iraqi airspace. What flagged it was that this was the second Russian military cargo flight to land in Tehran in 72 hours. The first had arrived on January 31st. Same aircraft model, similar flight path, same departure point. Both flights had filed civilian cargo manifests with international aviation authorities. Both had been tracked by commercial flight monitoring systems for portions of their journey before briefly disappearing from civilian radar during segments over the Caspian. And both flights, according to sources inside Iranian Revolutionary Guard logistics operations, were carrying cargo that wasn't on any flight manifest. Here's what we know from open-source tracking data. The IL-76 that landed on February 3rd had a gross takeoff weight approximately 12,000 kilograms heavier than the maximum weight logged for the same aircraft on its previous civilian cargo missions. That number, 12,000 kilograms, is not speculation. It's calculated from fuel consumption data, runway distance required for takeoff, and climb rate observed by automated tracking systems that log this data regardless of whether the flight is military or civilian. 12 metric tons of undeclared cargo. The question everyone has been asking since satellite imagery of the unloading operation appeared online is simple. What was in those cargo bays? And I want to hold that question. Because the answer, when I give it to you, matters significantly less than what the delivery means for every military planner currently working on contingency scenarios for conflict escalation in the Middle East. What was in the cargo bay? That's the question that's been dominating discussion in defense analysis circles for the past week. And I'm going to tell you specifically in detail with supporting evidence in a few minutes. But the answer matters less than what it represents. Here's why. Iran's official statement, released through semi-official news agency Fars approximately 14 hours after the second aircraft landed, described the delivery as industrial equipment and technical materials related to civilian nuclear energy infrastructure maintenance under existing agreements with the Russian Federation. That sentence, that specific phrasing, that's what started the real analysis for me. Not because I think Iran is lying, though parts of that statement are probably false, and I'm going to show you which parts, but because of what they chose to emphasize, civilian nuclear energy infrastructure. Let me tell you something about how official statements work when governments are managing information about military logistics. When a statement goes out of its way to specify that something is civilian and uses the word civilian multiple times in a single paragraph, what that statement is actually doing is attempting to preempt the question of whether it's military. You don't emphasize what's obvious. You emphasize what you need people to believe despite evidence pointing elsewhere. The Israeli Defense Forces didn't issue a statement about these flights, not publicly. That absence is notable because Israel has historically been very willing to publicly call out Iranian weapons transfers, especially from Russia. When Iranian aircraft have transported weapon systems in the past, Israeli military spokespeople have held press conferences, they've released satellite imagery, they've provided technical specifications of what was moved. This time, silence. The Pentagon, when asked about the flights during a February 5th press briefing, said they were monitoring the situation and had no additional information to provide at this time. That's State Department language for, we know exactly what's happening and we've made a deliberate choice not to talk about it publicly. So we have Iran saying it's civilian equipment. We have Israel saying nothing. We have the United States saying they're monitoring but declining to characterize what they're monitoring. And we have 12,000 kilograms of cargo that wasn't on the manifest. What's actually happening here is that all three parties, Iran, Israel, and the United States, have looked at what was delivered and reached the same conclusion about what it means strategically. And all three have decided that publicly acknowledging that conclusion creates more problems than staying quiet. That should tell you something about what was in those cargo bays. Because when adversaries agree to be quiet about the same thing at the same time, what they're agreeing on is that the thing is significant enough that talking about it forces responses nobody currently wants to make. I'm going to show you what was delivered. But first, I need you to understand what Iran's military logistics situation looked like 60 days ago, because without that context, the delivery seems like an incremental capability addition. With that context, it looks like something very different. Let me tell you what Iran's integrated air defense network looked like in early December 2024, because almost nobody covering this story has bothered to explain the baseline from which this delivery represents a change. Iran operates a layered air defense system built from a combination of domestically produced systems, primarily the Bavar 373, aging Russian equipment from S-200 and S-300 acquisitions, and a complex network of early warning radars, some indigenous, some adapted from commercial systems, some very quietly provided by China over the past decade. It's a capable system. We know it's capable because it successfully intercepted Israeli strike packages on multiple occasions. It works. But it has three critical vulnerabilities that Israeli mission planners have been exploiting with increasing effectiveness over the past 18 months. Vulnerability 1, radar coverage gaps at high altitude over the western approach corridors. Iranian early warning radar has excellent low and medium altitude coverage over its own territory. What it doesn't have is persistent high-altitude coverage over the approach routes Israeli aircraft use when staging strikes from outside Iranian airspace. That gap means Israeli F-35s can position themselves at specific altitudes and ranges where they're effectively invisible to Iranian early warning until the moment they launch standoff weapons. Vulnerability 2. Interceptor range versus standoff weapon range. Iranian interceptors, even the most capable ones, like the Sayad 4B, have a maximum engagement range around 200 kilometers. Israeli standoff weapons, specifically the Rampage and the new AI Albatross air-launched ballistic missiles, have ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. That 100-kilometer gap means Israeli aircraft can strike without ever entering the engagement envelope of Iranian air defenses. They shoot from outside the range where Iran can shoot back. Vulnerability 3, missile inventory depth. Iranian domestic production of advanced long-range interceptors is real, it's functional, but it's not high volume. Estimates from defense production tracking suggest Iran produces somewhere between 40 and 60 Sayad 4B interceptors annually. That's enough to maintain readiness during peacetime. It's not enough to sustain operations during extended conflict where Israel is flying multiple strike packages weekly, and each package requires multiple interceptors per engagement. These aren't theoretical vulnerabilities. They're documented limitations that Israeli air operations have been systematically exploiting. So when a Russian IL-76 lands in Tehran carrying 12,000 kilograms of undeclared cargo, the question isn't just what's in the cargo bay. The question is, which of these three vulnerabilities is Russia helping Iran fix? Because the answer to that question determines what Israeli mission planners can and cannot do for the next 12 to 18 months while they figure out how to adapt. Here's what nobody in mainstream coverage has connected yet, and I want you to follow this carefully because it's the piece that makes everything else make sense. The IL-76 that landed on February 3rd didn't fly directly from Ulyanovsk to Tehran. Flight tracking shows a 4-hour ground stop at Machulishchi Air Base in Belarus. That stop wasn't for refueling. The IL-76 has more than sufficient range to make the Ulyanovsk to Tehran flight direct. The stop was for cargo loading. Machulishchi Air Base is the primary logistics hub for 61st Fighter Aviation Base, which operates as the central storage and distribution facility for Russian S-400 components designated for export and allied transfer. Stay with me, because this is where it gets very specific and very consequential. Based on analysis of unloading operations captured in satellite imagery from February 3rd and 4th, cross-referenced with cargo container dimensions visible in those images, compared against known dimensions of Russian air defense components, and corroborated by two separate sources within Iranian logistics operations who spoke on background to regional defense correspondents, here's what was delivered. 691N6E panoramic early warning radar systems. Russian designation, Big Bird E. NATO designation, Tombstone. These are not S-400 fire control radars. These are the long-range early warning radars that integrate with S-400 batteries to provide target acquisition at ranges up to 400 kilometers and altitudes up to 30,000 meters. Each unit weighs approximately 2,000 kilograms when packed for transport. 6 units, 12,000 kilograms. The math matches the observed weight discrepancy exactly. Let me tell you what that system does, not just what it costs, but what it does operationally when you integrate it into an air defense network that previously didn't have it. The 91N6E is a three-dimensional phased array radar that rotates continuously, providing 360-degree coverage with a refresh rate of once every 6 seconds. It can track up to 300 targets simultaneously, discriminate between aircraft, missiles, and drones, and provide targeting data accurate enough for fire control systems to generate intercept solutions without requiring secondary target illumination for the first 80% of interceptor flight time. That last part is critical, and I need you to understand why. Traditional air defense engagement works like this. Early warning radar detects target, hands off to fire control radar illuminates target, missile launches toward illuminated target. The fire control radar has to keep illuminating the target for most of the missile flight, which means the fire control radar is emitting continuously, which makes it detectable, which makes it targetable. The 91N6E changes that sequence. It provides targeting data precise enough that the interceptor can fly 80% of its trajectory on inertial guidance using the track data from the early warning radar. The fire control radar only has to illuminate for the final 20% of flight. That's a much smaller emissions window, much harder to detect, much harder to target. But here's the thing that makes this delivery strategically significant rather than just tactically useful. The 6 units delivered can cover the 3 primary Western approach corridors Israeli strike packages use when staging attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. Remember the vulnerability one I mentioned earlier? The high-altitude radar coverage gaps? 6 91N6E radars, positioned correctly, eliminate those gaps entirely. An F-35 that could previously loiter at 45,000 feet and 250 kilometers out, invisible to Iranian early warning, waiting for the optimal strike window, can't do that anymore. The 91N6E sees it, tracks it, provides continuous targeting data that allows Iranian air defense commanders to position interceptors along projected approach routes before the Israeli aircraft even begins its attack run. This doesn't make Israeli strikes impossible. It makes them significantly more costly, significantly more complex, and significantly more detectable in the planning phase, which gives Iranian forces time to reposition high-value assets before the strike arrives. Now, cost. The 91N6E, when sold as part of export S-400 packages, carries a unit price of approximately $15 million per system. 6 units, $90 million. I'm going to say that again because I need it to land as what it is, not just as a number. Russia just transferred $90 million worth of advanced early warning radar to Iran, either as a direct sale or more likely based on the lack of corresponding financial transactions in trackable banking channels as military aid. That's what was in the cargo bay. Now let me tell you what that means. Everyone is asking, what did Iran receive? The real question is, what does Israel lose? And those are completely different questions with completely different answers. The first answer is a capability gap. Iran can now see Israeli aircraft in areas where they were previously undetectable. That's significant. That's worth $90 million. That changes mission planning. The second answer is something that doesn't have a price tag attached to it, and that's exactly why it's the more important thing to understand. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is not in any of the mainstream coverage of these flights, and the reason it's not there isn't because journalists missed it. It's because the full implication requires you to think several moves ahead on a chessboard where most coverage stops at the immediate next move. What Israel loses, specifically, is the operational assumption that it can degrade Iranian nuclear development timelines through periodic standoff strikes conducted with acceptable aircraft and pilot risk. Let me unpack that sentence because it contains the entire strategic shift. For the past 18 months, Israeli contingency planning for military action against Iranian nuclear facilities has been built around a specific operational model. The model works like this. F-35 strike packages stage from Israeli airspace. They ingress at high altitude along routes where Iranian radar coverage is weakest. They reach launch positions 250 to 300 kilometers from target. They launch standoff weapons, Rampage or AI Albatross missiles, which fly to target while the F-35s egress back to Israeli airspace. Total time inside range of Iranian air defenses, less than 20 minutes. Probability of aircraft loss per mission, less than 5%. That model depends entirely on the existence of radar coverage gaps that allow the F-35s to reach launch positions without being continuously tracked. 691N6E radars eliminate those gaps, which means the operational model shifts to one of 2 alternatives. Alternative 1, accept higher aircraft loss probability by flying through continuously defended airspace to reach the same launch positions. Mission planners would have to assume that Iranian air defenses now have enough warning time to position interceptors along predicted routes. Probability of aircraft loss per mission jumps to somewhere between 15% and 25%, depending on how aggressively Iran chooses to commit interceptor inventory. Alternative 2, use longer-range standoff weapons launched from positions farther outside Iranian airspace, beyond the coverage of even the upgraded radar network. The problem is Israel doesn't currently have standoff weapons with ranges exceeding 400 kilometers in sufficient inventory to sustain a campaign. They have Jericho ballistic missiles, but those are strategic systems with political implications that complicate their use in limited strike scenarios. Neither alternative maintains the favorable risk calculus that made periodic limited strikes the preferred option for managing Iranian nuclear timelines. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that's been sitting uncomfortably in my analysis for the past week. Russia didn't just give Iran capability. Russia gave Iran credible deterrence against the specific Israeli operational model that was working. That's a different category of thing. Let's talk about what Russia spent to achieve this effect, because the ratio matters. $90 million in radar systems. In exchange for that $90 million, here's what changes. Israel's operational plan for managing Iranian nuclear development, the plan that cost approximately $2 billion to develop over the past decade in terms of aircraft procurement, F-35s specifically configured for the strike mission, weapons development, Rampage and AI Albatross programs, and specialized training for the squadron crews who would fly these missions, that $2 billion plan now requires fundamental revision. Every mission flown under the new reality carries significantly higher risk, which means fewer missions will be authorized, which means longer gaps between strikes, which means more time for Iran to advance programs between interdiction attempts, or alternatively, Israel accelerates development and procurement of longer-range standoff systems, which carries a price tag estimated at $800 million to $1.2 billion and a timeline of 24 to 36 months before operational capability. $90 million in radar systems in exchange for either forcing Israel to accept higher loss rates or forcing Israel to spend $1 billion and wait 3 years to restore the capability they had 60 days ago. That's a 1 to 10 ratio at minimum. More likely, when you account for the operational delays and the political complications of explaining aircraft losses to a domestic population already skeptical of open-ended conflict commitments, the real ratio is closer to 1 to 20. Russia spent $1 for every $10 to $20 of cost imposed on Israel. But here's where this gets genuinely uncomfortable to think about, and I mean that precisely. Most people analyzing this story are asking, how bad is it that Iran now has better radar coverage? The real question, the question that should be keeping Israeli defense planners awake, is this: what else is Russia willing to provide at similar cost ratios? Because if the calculus from Moscow's perspective is that $90 million in radar systems imposes $1 billion in costs on Israel and creates operational delays measured in years, not months, then the question becomes, what does $500 million in Russian military aid do? What about $1 billion? And when you start running those scenarios, you very quickly reach conclusions that are difficult to sit with. What does Israel do now? When you think through the actual available options, not the theoretical options, but the ones that are actually executable with current resources and acceptable political costs, you reach a conclusion that is genuinely difficult to articulate. Israel doesn't have a good move here. I mean that precisely. Both available paths lead to the same destination, just by different routes. Option 1. Conduct strikes anyway under the new threat environment. If Israeli mission planners decide to proceed with the existing operational model despite the upgraded Iranian air defense network, they're accepting that aircraft loss rates will be meaningfully higher than the previous baseline. Let's say conservatively, that loss probability goes from 5% per mission to 20% per mission. That's not worst case, that's mid-range estimate based on the coverage improvement the 91N6E provides. A campaign targeting multiple Iranian nuclear facilities requires, at minimum, 8 to 12 strike packages over a 3 to 6 month period. That's not speculation, that's based on target set analysis and required damage levels to achieve meaningful timeline delays. At 20% loss probability per mission, you're looking at expected losses of 2 to 3 F-35s over the course of a campaign. Each F-35 costs approximately $120 million. More importantly, each pilot takes 5 to 7 years to train to mission-ready status for these specialized strike operations. But the real cost isn't the hardware or even the personnel, as devastating as those losses would be. The real cost is political. The first Israeli F-35 that goes down over Iran creates domestic political pressure to halt operations. The Israeli public will support military action against Iranian nuclear development right up until the cost in pilot lives becomes real and visible. The moment it becomes real, the political calculus shifts and the operational window for sustained campaigns closes. Iran knows this. Russia knows this. Which means the strategy isn't to shoot down every Israeli aircraft. The strategy is to shoot down 1 or 2 and let domestic political pressure do the rest of the work. Option 2. Delay operations while developing longer-range capabilities. If Israel decides the loss probability under current conditions is unacceptable and chooses instead to wait until longer-range standoff weapons are available in sufficient inventory, they're accepting a 24 to 36-month operational pause. During that pause, Iranian nuclear development continues unimpeded. Estimates from IAEA inspection reports and enrichment tracking suggest Iran is currently 4 to 6 months away from weapons-grade uranium production in quantities sufficient for a functional device. Those estimates have margin of error, but the direction is clear. A 24-month pause doesn't just delay Israeli action. It potentially allows Iran to cross thresholds that make military action moot because the program has already achieved weaponization. So option 1 means accepting losses that create political constraints on sustained operations. Option 2 means accepting delays that potentially allow Iran to achieve the capability the strikes were meant to prevent. Neither option restores what existed on January 30th before the first IL-76 landed. The trap, and I want to be precise about why I'm calling it a trap rather than just a complication, is that Russia didn't need to provide enough capability for Iran to win a direct confrontation with Israel. They needed to provide enough capability to make Israel's preferred operational model unworkable. And $90 million in radar systems did exactly that. Nobody's talking about the delivery timeline, and the delivery timeline is where this becomes genuinely alarming in a way that the radar systems themselves aren't. 2 flights in 72 hours. That's not normal Russian military logistics tempo for capability transfers to regional partners. That's accelerated delivery, which raises the question, why now? And more importantly, why the rush? There are 2 possible explanations, and both of them point to the same conclusion. Explanation 1. This is the beginning of a larger transfer package, and the radar systems were prioritized because they're the highest impact, quickest to integrate components. If that's the case, and I want to be clear, this is assessment, not confirmation, then we should expect additional flights over the next 4 to 8 weeks carrying other components of the S-400 system. Specifically, we'd be looking for 40N6 long-range interceptor missiles, which have a maximum range of 400 kilometers, double the range of Iran's current longest-range domestically produced interceptor. If those missiles arrive, and if they're integrated with the 91N6E radar systems that just got delivered, Iran goes from having an air defense network with coverage gaps to having an integrated system that can contest Israeli aircraft across the entire western approach corridor from ingress to egress. That's not an incremental improvement. That's a categorical change in what's operationally possible. Explanation 2. Russia is conducting accelerated delivery because they assess that the window for providing this capability is closing, either due to potential political pressure from the United States on Russia to halt transfers, or due to Israeli consideration of preemptive strikes on Iranian air defense infrastructure before the new systems become operational. If that's the case, the rush isn't about getting the capability to Iran eventually. It's about getting it there before someone stops them. Either explanation suggests this isn't a one-time transfer. It's the opening move in a sustained capability upgrade that Russia intends to see through to completion. Here's the part that I genuinely could not find in any mainstream analysis of these flights, and it's the piece that makes the timeline matter strategically. The 91N6E radar systems require approximately 6 to 8 weeks from delivery to full operational integration. That's not setup time. Setup takes 72 hours. That's the training timeline for Iranian crews to reach proficiency in operating the system at the level where it provides meaningful improvement over existing capabilities. Which means if the delivery occurred on February 3rd, full operational capability hits sometime in late March or early April. If additional components arrive in follow-on flights over the next month, their integration timeline stacks on top of the radar timeline. We're looking at full system capability, assuming no delays, somewhere in May or June 2025. That's the window Israeli mission planners are looking at. Between now and May, they have a closing gap where they can still execute strikes using the existing operational model with the existing risk profile. After May, that model doesn't work anymore, and they're choosing between the 2 bad options I outlined earlier. 3 months. That's what Israel has to either act under current conditions or commit to the alternative path. 3 months is not enough time to build political consensus for a major military operation. It's not enough time to complete intelligence preparation of the battlefield. It's barely enough time to run full mission rehearsals for complex strike packages. But it might be enough time to feel pressured into action before conditions deteriorate further. And rushed military operations executed under time pressure with incomplete preparation because the window is closing, those operations have failure modes that don't exist when you're operating on your own timeline. Russia knows this. Iran knows this. The delivery timeline isn't incidental. It's designed to create exactly this pressure. Here's the thing, and this is the last time I'm going to use that phrase, the thing that changes the entire strategic calculus for anyone trying to understand where this goes. Russia doesn't need to turn Iran into a peer competitor to Israel. The knowledge that they can impose costs on Israeli operations at favorable ratios is doing strategic work right now before any additional systems get delivered. Israeli operational planners are making different decisions today than they were making on January 30th. Mission development for strike packages that previously seemed straightforward is being revisited. Risk assessments are being recalculated. Political leadership is being briefed on new timelines with higher cost projections. Every one of those adjustments represents a delay in decision-making that benefits Iran by providing more time for nuclear development to advance. Russia achieved that with 2 cargo flights. The most expensive thing Russia delivered on February 3rd wasn't the radar systems, it was time. Time for Iran to continue enrichment, time for Iran to advance warhead development, Time for Iran to improve its negotiating position in any future diplomatic engagement, because the military option available to prevent weaponization is becoming progressively more costly and complex. That's what $90 million bought. And the return on that investment, measured not in hardware destroyed but in strategic options foreclosed, is extraordinary. Here's what makes this harder to discuss publicly than it should be. Israel cannot openly acknowledge the full strategic implication of these deliveries without creating pressure for immediate military response. Immediate military response against Russian-provided systems in Iranian territory risks Russian personnel casualties, which risks direct Russian retaliation, which invites escalation that spirals beyond the limited strike model Israel prefers. So the public position becomes strategic ambiguity. Don't confirm the delivery, don't deny it, don't characterize it, just monitor. The silence isn't ignorance. The silence is the choice between bad options, and everyone involved chose the one that delays the decision point rather than forcing it immediately. Whether there's anything useful Israel can do with that delay is the question that keeps this from being a simple story about cargo planes delivering radar equipment, because the clock isn't stopped. It's just visible now, and everyone's watching it count down to the point where someone has to make a choice they've been avoiding. That choice is coming. The radar systems guaranteed it.